Hello and welcome to my studio, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell you the tale of how I got to play for 5 years with amazing creative coders to answer impossible questions, all of that from a hunch, but more importantly from various intertwined experiences. It all started in the 80s around the beautiful myth still around today that computers can do anything. I'll use that tale and share reflections as we go along, weaved in. It should help to shed the light on the artificial narrative of what in effect is a beautiful mess, and speak of the beauty of our field of musicking with technology. So the structure will be: embrace the mess, think like an artist, pay the price, then reap the benefits. First, embrace the mess. With the subtitle, Beware of the Ontological Jump. Life is messy. We're all free human agents with various perspectives and positions and privileges and background, and we're bounced around in our life. Chaotic situations, needless to say, as we can see right now. And if we believe behavioral economists like Daniel Kahneman, pattern-seeking brains like ours really like simplified narratives. We like stories. More importantly, whoever writes the story has a lot of power. So let's embrace the richness of the complexity of our field to have a more fluid, more adaptive perspective on all the recent questions. In the past, I've been accused to be all over the place, whereas I saw a natural trial and error process in the richness of polyperspectivism. But if we look at my past at a glance, in a kind of axis where you have music technology division that is common to our field, I think that that narrative might have some resonance with most of you who love to do music, or love music and its tools, and or something in between. So you can have my music line where we have all these instrumental practices. We can see my composition strand, including arrangement, my great teachers that fostered questions, much bigger than my ability usually, and very aspirational, which is an important feature. And all these settings were kind of cross-pollinating. And then on the other side, on the tech side, I've looked at all these computer languages, and I've also liked a lot of the gear, from high school tech team to lo-fi touring to festival tech direction, a kind of studio fetish as well of hyper-produced pop, from my ear trainings with the Beatles up to Trevor Horn in the 90s. So it's actually quite messy, but I see it as cross-pollination. If we time align a bit more and we talk about all these relationships, we can see how my bass playing led me to radiating loudspeakers, or we can see how theater music led me to Max MSP, which led me to mix music via Peter Gabriel, and led me to design a metronome which syncopates to help my bass playing. We can also see how electroacoustic tech direction confirms some aesthetic discourse, or how my love of logo made me sensible to Messiaen. So I would like to offer a positive definition. We live in that zone. SMC research is the field. And I would like to offer the producer as a metaphor, seen as a sort of gluing between specialism, but incredibly hard to define. Its fluid and adaptive role between engineering and using the studio as an instrument, arranging and sometimes composing, a bit of a psychologist slash critical slash support. And I think this is very interesting. I have a problem with the word interdisciplinarity because for me this word defines the boundary of the field as identities, and us as a kind of combination of things, a salad. I think that this makes an ontological jump. We inhabit a world that is complex, yes, between proper composition and proper software engineering and proper machine learning, but these archetypal specialities are perspectives. They're communities of practice, if we believe Wenger's, and they're useful. But we should embrace our various perspectives, plural, and therefore let's be candid about our various biases. So my proposal is definitely not a replacement of these specialities. It's not an add-on for a grand application or to synergize a business with creatives, and we'll come back to that problematic term later. But interdisciplinary implies a hustle in the middle, which I'm not very happy. I think it's a field in itself, a perspective in itself on that beautiful mess. Another problematic reading, which is maybe less problematic, from my friend Simon Emerson, when he was trying to define the music that a generation like mine or even younger practices, and he called that eclectic. And at the time it kind of shocked me because I saw cohesion, and it took me some time to be able to articulate what I see as one cross-feeding. So what are the commonalities between all of us in this room? But in these rooms, I should say. We're all like music. Some of us will have rock star dreams and stage envy. Some of us will have performed. We have embodied the flow. We've been inspired and focused. Sometimes not. We can transfer that to other places. We're also researchers. We have excitement of an hypothesis. We have the buzz of answers. We like results, but however transient they are. And what makes our feel great is that we're able to embrace the mess. Most of us will have worn multiple hats, comfortable in that middle ground, the in-between these archetypes or these clear visions in the corners. We're fed from all the place, including an early embracing of some dirty word, the I words as I like them, so improvisation and intuition in our papers. The artificiality of all these divisions came clear to me in 2001 when I was working on my band's 4th album, and we were given a chance to go live with families. We were doing jazz, so Afro-American music, and we wanted to learn traditional Western African music. It was very naive, very positive racism there, but it was the child of equalitarian societal projects of Quebec's Quiet Revolution. There was this incredible NGO though, that like my composition teachers, listened to the essence of what was good, and then tried to answer the question, how do we send these 4 naive improvisers doing real-time processing of free jazz with groove to meet another tradition, not doing the world beat thing? And they sent us to the right place. Instead of deflating our dreams, which is a very important thing, they took the good essence of it and made us grow. And fundamentally, we had a life-changing experience. Life is fragile, life is messy, life is complex. The diversity is beyond reckoning and definitely beyond music technology taxonomies. And how neglectable all of this was and an impediment to development and cross-pollination. We ended up giving more than receiving. We connected musically with the youth, the teenagers, making rap beats for them because most of them were craving having instrumental rap beats. That's the music they were actually listening. So instead of going to learn traditional music, we exchanged on musical background that were completely unexpected. We had a gig, an album, relatively successful, had the inverse effect of perpetuating the myth. But more importantly, there was this documentary film that was made, and it's been praised for its honesty. It's an anti-making of, a kind of coming of age, where it started to break my convictions that all of these beautiful specific subject divide in my narrative earlier were actually from my training and not very constructive nor useful nor actually true. So it gave me better understanding of my field as a whole and specialisms only as perspectives. And therefore, it allowed me to be myself. So let's think like an artist. I've said before that artists were taxonomy solvents and agents of chaos. Their way is to hybridize, to go forward. They plunder, not copy, but merge. It's soaking reality, and everything feeds their monomania. I think if we embrace a combinatory aspect of this and we think of Darwinian needs of novelty, they foster divergence through recombination. This vision was built as an agonistic model to offer a rich collaboration of practice research in dialogue with musicologists. I think their role is to model our practice. They observe, they react, and then we react to being put in a box because we don't like that. But if we reflect and we're humble, we can learn a lot about ourselves with these models, and we can rise to the challenge. It's a simplified model, obviously, but that simplification is often a rich enabler, easier to adapt. And this noise and this error is information and is good for inspiration. This pigeonholing might seem to contradict the message to embrace the ontological mess, but in effect we need tools, and actual use of cliché archetypes and roles that are not embodied in a single individual is useful as role play to change perspective. We can think of De Bono's hat, or psychotherapy use of role play, or Eno and split oblique strategies. They're all ways of getting out of our cognitive grooves. Maybe that section should have been renamed Think Like a ... So, I'll picture 3 archetypes that I think are useful. I'll try to make them shine, I'll try to make them boring in a box, and try therefore to insult everyone equally. On the positive side, you have artists which are dreamers, have crazy ideas and diverge. You have engineers, which are the wisdom, thorough and systematic, they converge and optimize. And then you have the scientific, which are the bearer of knowledge, and new knowledge, cutting edge, and experiment with rigor. If we try to look at these from a negative perspective, I'll start with the artists. This is where I'm from, but they're deluded, not bothered by reality. Quality control is obsessive, which reminds us of the Buxton quip, and naive, sometimes on hip stuff like machine learning or even parallel processing or spectral processing or even descriptors. And we tend to be kind of egocentric and obsessive if you look at my meandering narrative of my biography. Engineers on their side can have this rational approach, seeing implementation costs, party pooping all the time, seeing bug reports as nuisance. And scientific don't even think about the users. They have research code that is gaffer taped together, not bothered by documentation or users, and very focused on a very specific question, sometimes missing the context. So obviously that's nobody. These are hats. But we have to make sure that every people in our team take as many of these roles because it makes empathy easier. I would even go one step further. We should dissolve that taxonomy too. For instance, when people talk about creatives, I find that quite insulting. I've read about creativity, I find that fascinating, but it's always presented as a problem or as an exploitation or as a kind of resource by business people. I much prefer Monty Python's approach, or Clee's approach in his wonderful Keynote, about creativity as a pragmatic thing to do. I've seen plenty of boring artists, comfortable in the cliches of their canon, and I've seen a lot of very creative engineers and scientists, which we can say is even harder for them since their training tends to be quite converging. So my real first proper tip is to make sure that everyone wears these hats and alternate in a convergence-divergence cycle where tinkering and dreaming is part of an iterative design but with unfocus. Very important to zoom out as much as possible. Otherwise, on one side we can drown in the details, I know the devil is there, but we need to see the bigger picture. On the other hand, if we stay in dreamland, we never commit. We need to zoom in, we need to test. Let's give a concrete example of this idea. The project I was talking about earlier. It started by me using cat art to try to use the bass to control the computer. And that came from dissatisfaction with previous augmented instruments I had, which is all documented in this paper. Even in that new instance, I was dissatisfied with attacks and granularity of it. In parallel, with serendipity, there was a presentation by Axel Rebel on his flute sampling matrix using signal decomposition. And more importantly, his vertigo when I asked him if I could use that with my modular synthesizer. Even more vertigo when I started to grab online classes to try to build all the missing bits for myself. And even more serendipity when there was some immense success by our convolution tools and the politics of UK funding, where I had to define my research. What is research when you try to use technology within the creative process? One thing that was sure is I couldn't be good at everything. There's 24 hours a day and I need to sleep. So what happened, what I thought as an artist looking at this, is I had this idea of fluid finding, where all the sounds on my hard drive, if I kept them, they had something for me, would be available as a file, but also as a rolling window and as composites, and maybe with their neighbors imagined with plus minus pitch, plus minus duration, in a kind of descriptive space that made sense whenever I needed it. And all of that would be allowed to merge through some sound of fluid sound designing, taking all these sounds and using ideas of style transfer that we all heard, but making them sound good instead of contrasting like demo archetypes, at the level of mastering sound quality like the tools I use when I do mastering, and with no latency whatever, using equivalent of a supercomputer horsepower. Obviously that's deluded. That makes no sense. But Toning down this idea, trying to make it more realistic, I started to think about the Fluid Corpus Manipulation project, which is set to investigate music making with private large sound banks, giving the creative coders access to machine listening and machine learning technologies within their mastered environment with the right granularity of interface, giving them the tools, giving them the knowledge, and therefore the power to use and abuse these tools. It's all done through an iterative process with us in the lab, and then we have professional commissions by leading electronic musicians, which will use and subvert the prototypes, and then we try to release to the world in communities, hopefully in and outside the usual research centers. So it's a great adventure. But like great adventures, it comes at a cost. So what is the cost to pay? Let's pay the price. There's no free ride, obviously. One of the costs is consensus. Everyone talks about it, everyone wants all the freedom, but it's costly in real life. Like democracy, it comes with responsibility, and consensus is expensive in time. There are various methods, obviously. We can work in parallel in a sort of emulation, we compromise. Not always as good. We can vote, which is not, again, superb all the time. But this is where hats are very important. To be archetypes more than people, we need to invest the time for everyone in the team to experience with various level of competence and incompetences, taking various roles, very important. Another cost is discipline, which is also linked to time. As a musician, daily practice of my instrument, of ear training, of composing, of mixing, there are things that you lose very quickly. And if you code a lot and you get away from a language for certain times, even your own code, you will all have experienced that distance might be good, but it has a cost when we come back. Another interesting cost is simplification. It's a mixed blessing. I said it was useful earlier to manipulate things, but it is noisy, and that noise brings this conundrum. How do we align these intersubjective myths or quality insurance or the fragility of all these canons, and that might share vocabulary, same vocabulary to represent different things, different vocabulary to talk about the same thing. Some even say that creativity is domain specific. So this idea of simplification and cross-domain navigation is not really simple, and it has a cost again. For instance, we could have taken my biography and we could have done it by an access of influential people that defined my thinking. We all know that we're the child of our training. Mentors, colleagues, mentees, students as my parallel computers exploring the world, and a timeline. But we could also see it, there are many different ways to look at my past and try to make sense of where I am right now. And this simplification, again, is very noisy. Which leads me to the feeling of imposture. It's really difficult when we have a unique perspective from a unique combination, like our gene mutation, to be confident that we're on the right path. I might be the only base laptop studio person, but if you think carefully, our chair, Andrea A.Valle, has got the same thing, and he's also a good coder and a teacher, and he wrote 2 books, one on semiology. So I've spoke to colleagues on Facebook, of all places, and talk about this in-betweenness being very difficult to not feel like a half-baked something. It's a shared feeling among many of us. But in effect, our strength is in our unique perspective. And we should remember that we have domain knowledge that we could transfer, but more importantly, we have metacognition, procedural knowledge, where we could learn things. We can build bridge, but it is still expensive to open that groove. And there's also the cost of politics. We need to convince people that they need to trust us. Most places have taken the easy route of putting scientists in one side of the building and the artist on the other side. And they expect people to mingle in the middle, which is not going to happen if we don't invest resource in people who can make the bridge, make it central to their life and requirement like we do in SMC research. We will build a bridge because we will be able to embrace and engage with each specialties in a way that is translatable. We're translators, and beyond that, subverters of that translation. This means that we need to hire diversity and listen to it. We need to yield power, however uncomfortable it is for our certainties. In my case, in the interview process of hiring my team, I asked them what was wrong with my project straight away. You need to set that at the onset. The three researchers that we are working on fluid corpus manipulation each wear these hats at some time in their workflow. Three artists, but okay, I'm not a scientist, but I'm interested in science questions too. And even the musicologist, the fourth person, is also a creative coder and a composer. All of the composers are all creative coders as well, but with various levels of fluency and also very different musical interests. Obviously, they are not hired as client and we're not provider. We don't want that model. We want to keep an interaction where we both talk as artists and as coders. And we've also built in something expensive called dissemination and workshops as part of the methodology. It shows that all our assumptions need to be challenged within the project for the project to go forward. Now it's time to reap the benefits. What are the advantages of such vision that encompasses everything? First, the ideas are plenty. And these people, like us, jack of all trades, master of none doesn't apply. We're jack and masters of a few trades. And we can engage with all these fields with effervescence, with understanding, with empathy, with perspective, with quality friction between them. And we can take more enlightened decisions. For the Fluid Corpus Manipulation project, I like the manifesto, the in our paper, and my favorite is the idea of technical disposition, which is an invitation. Instead of the machismo coding, I can code high level, I can code low level. It's a plane, not of abilities necessarily, but that varies from moment to moment in one person's workflow, what disposition they have towards technology, convergence, solving problem versus more divergent experimentation, getting your hands dirty. And I really like this approach. Otherwise, bleeding edge, current thoughts. This is really unpublished. First, the obvious one, I presume everyone in this room is well aware that MIR is an interesting, vague word, and artificial intelligence, machine learning are often used as buzzword, definitely not a panacea. It's full of potential for what it does really well, which is pattern finding. But the results that we get might be interesting, but in terms of artists, we like liminal cases, we like unique artists, identifiable. So if I was building generic music, maybe I would be worried, but I think Björk and Ikeda should definitely not be worried. Although the computer starts to play well Go, and that should get us a little worried. What's good at the moment that I see the best is collaborative approach, where machines do what they're good at and humans do what they're good at. And an example is Isotope using assisted mixing. Another example is people using sample banks when it's really specific, for drums especially. The synthesis stuff I see is usually full of artifact, but as our manifesto say, we should embrace the artifact for what they are. Less obvious conclusions that are not published yet, granularity of interface and knowledge is really everything. I think artists really like to subvert, and you just have to listen to the 5 works that have been published so far. I like to think of the vocoder and the valve amp as good examples of constructive abuse by artists, and when the dialogue started to work with the builders of such devices, it started to multiply the potentials of these. One other thing I've discovered, which might be obvious for some of you, is that query is really interactive. It's really a dialogue in the heuristic process. I'm learning about what I'm trying to do as an artist as I formulate my question, and I'm given an answer which is exactly the answer to the question, which was probably ill-formed at the moment. It's temporally convergent, very situated, and I've got a good video example of this if you're interested with audio guide. The ideas that I would offer right now as a kind of blue sky thing, I would like to have a cliché finder. I would like to find the Tremblayism, a kind of self-Shazam, maybe to help me find my own cliché and not do them again, or to build assisted variation. I would also like to be able to use big data tools on small data sets. Like my computer's data set is still too big for personal computers, in effect, in my dream I've described earlier. But this idea of having an overnight trawler which plunders my digital debris and asks me the next day to Tinder vote on them, I really like this idea. Another question that I'm still not sure about is how do we make a successful open source community? I know there's lots of literature, but I can see good examples and bad examples on each camp. Small is beautiful, so is simplicity. I think the support of various entry points is the angle of approach right now, and we hope to embrace the richness of wider communities of practice inside and outside academia. There's a lot of interesting practice-based research out there. So, how to conclude? I think my subtitle was wrong. This in-betweenness idea is not really what we are as SMC researcher. We have multiple perspectives, we have multiple visions, we inhabit this space between these Platonic ideals, and we really embrace the complexity and the richness of that beautiful mess. It is our beautiful mess. Thank you.
Okay, so we are online. I'm very happy to be here with our keynote speaker, Pierre Tremblay. Thanks for the inspiring and very, how can I say, complex keynote. The idea of openness, I think it's a relevant feature in keynote speeches. We have some questions, and so I will start with a question from the people. One is a curiosity, but I think it's interesting. You say that there was a link between logo and mission, and of course, being a fan of both, as the one who made a question, we wanted to know a little bit more about this, because I think it deals with the idea of having perspective, no, in terms of specialism, which is also another question, because there are two very different things, but you can put them together, no?
They're not different so much. A logo, if you think about it, the first thing you do in logo is to build a little boring house, okay? You control the mouse and you think, at one point you make a mistake and something starts to phase. You have the wrong angle and suddenly you're introduced to the limited modes of transposition straight away. This is okay. This is all these geometric, like the thinking of Messiaen in terms of writing, all is limited. He's obsessed by geometry, and especially recursive geometry. And logo that's where it starts to be beautiful. Otherwise, just building a little house and your logo is boring. But what's fun is to go through these kind of more open era that you see and then show you. And I was like 7 when I did logo, but suddenly that world of spinning, like spirograph, but like a kind of spirograph you don't have to get your hands exactly. So this is the link, and it led to this idea of doing that with a drum at one point, and then it was the 90s, and it was when Steve Coleman and M-Bass were kind of, it's Messiaen with the drums. So suddenly that's why I started to do with my band some kind of complex polyharmony that were symmetrical and polyrhythms and phasing things. But all of that is born from my fascination with errors in recursive geometry. That logo is the best place to discover when you're a 7-year-old.
Yeah, I think that maybe you can expand a little bit, because I think that the question by Palle Dalsted substantially can be traced to this discussion. He says, I love the idea of specialism as perspectives, but would like to hear more. Could you elaborate on it? So I think we have touched it, but maybe.
Yeah, so it's this idea that life is so it's the ontological job. So you've got a beautiful mess, which is reality. It's fluffy, it's complicated, it's tentacular. The line I trace between logo and Messiaen is an artificial narrative. What happened is I was fascinated by these things. I'm a complex human being with lots of my freeness and my agency. And the fields are crystallization of art ideals, but the reality, we have to not forget that the reality is multidimensional. And I think the more I do machine learning and at the moment, the more I understand that dimension reduction and seeing the complexity of the problem is always a question of perspective. And therefore, all of these communities that have gelled around questions might define in their historiography, defining key moments and key questions. But these are artificial narratives. If we believe the behavioral economists like Kahneman and these wonderful things, like we invent stories to make sense of the mess, but the mess is what the ontology is, and these are perspectives on the mess. So Palle, which I happen to know, does interface design, he does improvisation, he does some sound design as well, and all of these are intertwined. When he takes a decision about his sound design, will influence the way he plays. When he does a good gig or a bad gig, that will influence his response, subjective response on what's going to drive what he likes, his tastes, the dirty words, improvisation, intuition, taste. These are all beautifully active in the Quick's brain. What we call our intuition is just cognitive grooves, and these are reinforced by all these amazing experiences. But we have to never forget that the mess is in the middle. And what's beautiful about this is then you can enter that space in a candid manner. You can say, this is the sum of my influence biases. This is where I'm at. This is what I think. You're going meta.
Yeah. Actually,
and then you can share the gray zones between all these fields, which I'm not for separation. I'm for embracing where they overlap and where the agonisms, where they actually have friction that could be constructive for both to build upon in a kind of emulation.
Yeah, actually, I'd like to make a question while we're still waiting if there are other questions. So the common ground, what is your experience? Because I work with computer scientists, but I am in a humanities department, sometimes a bit of an alien. And so is it true that, because it's cool, this idea of having a common background, but sometimes it's very complicated. By the way, the spreading of the use of computer in music, so substantially all audio is digital, at least in terms of its delivery now.
Yeah.
And this has not been followed by a proportional spreading, let's say, of coding or computational way of thinking. And it seems to me that the diffusion of mobile devices is pushing away people farther from understanding this idea of working with computers. No, so not putting together, not creating a common ground, but it might separate people maybe in terms of competencies. I want to know what you think about this.
Okay, so you seem to see them more separate than I see them. So if you're designing a codec, or if you're designing software for like Ableton, will have everything. Let's talk about Ableton. It's a good example.
I'm not saying that they are separated. I'm saying that sometimes I think it's still difficult to think about this having a common ground. So people try to stay in the block.
Yeah, and this is where I say that we as SMC have a strength, is that because we're confronted to the polyperspectivism, it's built in our field. Because you see, so like everything from when I got my job in Huddersfield, they asked me what is computer composition, and I said editing a classical recording was for me computer composition. My electroacoustic ears allowed me to do perfect seamless crossfade. Like this is because of my reduced listening training, and everything pollinates all the time. Everything is feeding. So yes, it's really hard for people to talk, but if we go one step over, because we know it's hard, we can invest the time that when we disagree, understand the source of that disagreement, because it can be vocabulary, it can be priorities. There's 24 hours a day. Not everyone's good at everything. So it could be a matter of priorities. That's why the hats I like very much, because they allow you to try to empathize with the other person's perspective. You have a composer trying to use your code in our project. They are creative coders. Their hands are dirty in prototypes, but they are also invested artistically, and there will be a frustration. And for us to really empathize with that frustration, we need to use it as well. So having all of us engaging with the, let's call it the user perspective, but that's not the proper word. It's more the receiver of that interface decision, because that's what it is. It's an interface decision, which is very, very biased anyway. But we try to make it as unbiased as possible. But to be on the receiving end gives us straight away the vertigo of how everything is situated, everything is an assumption, and we have to be modest. We have to really come to that table with an open mind. And if we do that, then we have new good ideas. If we don't do that and we camp each our camp, but the computer scientist will go and design interface that nobody wants to use, and the musician will continue play with the guitar, not caring about computer science. And this is an archetype. That's not true, but it is. There is this tension where people abandon the ship because it is an expensive process to meet in the middle. But that, I'm arguing, is where the beauty of our field is this is where there's so much potential.
Yeah, I strongly support this, of course. But let me end probably with a joke. You know that there is maybe you've seen it on Facebook. There is a sort of game. As an example, you have a duck face plus a candle plus an apple equal a number, and then other combination. And someone is challenging some friend to solve it. So someone said, "Hey, just replace the duck face, the candle, and the apple with X, Y, and Z, and you have a system of equation." Weren't you all saying you ate mathematics at high school? So I like it also a lot, this idea, because I think it's the point of trying to generalize some aspects and to see that effectively when you work with a computer, even if you're writing an email, you're still having a dialogue in some sense with Turing or with von Neumann or all the others. People working also on the material artifacts, some Chinese worker, because actually, so it's a sort of dialogue, continuous dialogue among all people involved in culture.
Yes, and we can just, you and I are old enough to remember the Max Super Collider war, which one sounds better, which one is better. But if we get out of this artificial dialectic, it is an artificial dialectic, because in effect, each of them are feeded by a communities plural of practice, which is in turn fed by the assumption from that software that gives certain affordances better than the other, and that will bias the research and use. And if you're not happy, usually you change ship. But in my case, because I thought I was good at Max, now I work with proper Max coders, so it's very humbling. But I thought I would go at Max 10 years ago, so I just said, I need to break my Maxisms. And just going to Super Collider, first thing to do, trying to make it maxing, and suddenly understanding that I'm missing the boat. And your book was yet another eye-opener in that sense, that showing the affordances, but that also shows that the community, the language that you're deciding, and the research aesthetic and computer science and everything in between that is done in an environment is incredibly interconnected.
Okay, so I think that, well, there are no other questions. I think maybe we're running out of time. We try to keep on scheduling. There's a question, but I think, Pierre Alexandre, you can reply on the chat because it deals with Flucoma information. So maybe you can post a link directly. That would be.
I will post links, yes.
Better. So I thank you again for the keynote speech, and see you soon, as I will say in a moment. So now what happened is that I'll throw you out of the conversation, and what happens now is that I am announcing. I'm closing the conference. I have the honor of closing the conference after my observations. I will give the mic to Simone for the best paper award. So, well, what is going on in these days? So we had 3 very intense days here on the web. Today, nothing less than some glitch on the internet. Yes, it has been different from our usual conference, evidently, but in our humble opinion, this difference hasn't implied a diminutive feature. Well, you would say, you would have your opinion. As you have seen, we've tried to exploit some of the possibilities of the format that we try to devise. Of course, there are trade-offs to be taken into account. We have restricted live streaming to question and answer, we could have done everything live, but it would not have been so smooth. And at the end, considering the situation of internet, it has been smooth, even if today we had some small problems. Yeah, we know that we might be at home, but in front of a computer, it can be more tiring than staying away. If this mixed format has worked, it is thanks to you, the SMC community. We were a bit scared of what could have happened on the YouTube chat. Typical problem, nothing. On the contrary, it has become a place, a real place where we read questions, comments, greetings to all friends. That was very nice. I think I can speak for my colleagues in the organization. We have really appreciated that. So thanks, first of all, to the SMC community and to all the participants on the web. Thanks, of course, to the authors, the chairs for their not so easy work, to our inspiring keynote speakers. Let me remind their names: Anna Chambaud, Marek Koloniewski, Pierre, Tremblay. Let us just a couple of thanks to silent people. First of all, to Axea, the organization service that has worked and is still working with us in the organization of the SMC conference. And last, but surely not least, to our technical mastermind, the indefatigable Carlo Barbagallo. I don't know if Carlo can pop up on Skype. If so, please do it for a greeting. And I'll tell you a secret. I am in Torino, but this stream has been carefully manufactured and delivered to you from Acireale, Sicily. So it's really a widespread edition of the conference. Now, drum roll. You just think about it. Think about a drum roll. Let me introduce the organizer of the next SMC conference. And guess who's the winner? Here we are. So I don't know actually if we all, me, both and you, have been lucky, but this didn't become as a surprise. Indeed, you can start making a tick, a mark on your calendar for this same week in June 2021. Day more, day less, precise details will come soon. Jokes apart, we really hope to see you finally in Torino. Yes, this is the Italian gesture you have to replicate. You can track it with mock-up what you want. Now, let me pass the microphone to Simone, but it's not finished yet because we have the Best Paper Award, and after that, there is the final music session. Thanks to all.
Thank you, Andrea. So, hi everyone, and I think also Haris, my co-scientific chair,
sorry.
right, is here. Haris, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Cool. So I guess we can go with a few slides about the Best Paper Award.
Our scientific committee, and I will share my screen.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Right now. Can you see it?
Okay, should be fine.
Anymore.
Can't see, we can't follow the YouTube stream at the same time, but yeah, I can see it now. So yeah, you can go to the next page, Andrea.
Right.
And so yeah, this is just the people who decided upon who should win this Best Paper Award. It's Andrea, Haris, and myself. And in the next page, we have the procedure that we adopted this year. Andrea, please. Yeah, so it's a two-stage procedure. First, we extracted from our reviews the top 5 papers according to the review scores, meaning that we selected those that had an exceptional weighted average, where weighted means weighted by the confidence of the reviewers, above 2.5. I remind that the review score could go from -3, which was a strong reject, to 3, strong accept. So these were really exceptionally highly rated papers. And out of these 5 papers, we selected the paper that, in our opinion, was delivered through the best presentation. And here we made no particular distinction between oral or poster presentation. We gave an equal weight even though of course, the poster videos were shorter, much shorter than the oral videos. All right, so in the next page, we can see the 5 nominations. So we have 16 Years of Sound and Music Computing, a look into the history and trends of the conference and community by Davide Andrea Mauro, Federico Avanzini, Adriano Barattè, Luca Andrea Ludovico, Stavros Talampiras, Smiren Dimitrov, and Stefania Serafin. Then we have Tours Playing in the Air, Modeling Motion, Sound, Energy Relationships in Electric Guitar Performance Using Deep Neural Networks by Chari Erdem, Ki Chaolan, Julian Führer, Charles Martin, Jim Teresen, and Alexander F. Samiensenius. Sorry for the pronunciation. Then we have Real-Time Implementation of a Physical Model with Trombone Marina by Sylvine Williamson, Stefania Serafin, Stefan Bilbao, and Michele Duceschi. Good Artist Copy, Great Artist Seal, Strategies for Creative Exploitation of the Chameleon Harmonization Assistant by Asterios Sakarakis, Stamatia Karetsidou, Maximos Kaliakatsos Papakostas, and Emilios Kamboropoulos. I hope I got the right pronunciation, Haris. And finally, Identifying Master Violinists Using Note-Level Audio Features by Yudong Zhao, Georgi Fasekas, and Mark Sandler. So we actually gave one vote. Each of us gave one vote to what he thought was the best paper. And in the next slide, we unanimously decided, Andrea, please go to the next slide, that the winner is, drum roll, next slide, Tours Playing in the Air, Modeling Motion, Sound, Energy Relationships in Electric Guitar Performance Using Deep Neural Networks by Chari Erdem and colleagues. So congratulations. And I think we have Chari online now. You can say a few words, maybe.
Yeah, hello. Hello, everyone. Well, considering this amazing selection of works in this edition of SMC conference, I must say it's a huge honor to be deemed worthy of this award. And I would first of all like to thank to my main collaborator in this project, Ki Chaolan, as well as to all my co-authors, Julian Führer, Charles Martin, Jim Teresen, and Alexander F. Jensenius, and of course, Ritmo Center for Interdisciplinary Studies in Rhythm, Time, and Motion at the University of Oslo for supporting this work. So thank you all for the consideration and of course for all the huge effort you put in delivering this great edition of Sound and Music Computing Conference. Yeah.
Thank you, Chari. So I guess now I will pass the word again to Andrea and for a final greetings.
Okay, I don't know if you can see me. I think so. So I have nothing more to say than see you next year in Torino. So we will update, maybe upgrade our logo, Torino 2021. So thanks a lot to all. And by the way, there is the music program at 4. And as you have understood, all the materials will stay on this YouTube channel, so they will be available. We will try to see if we can put some markers, as has been suggested by the community, so that you can use them as references for your future works. Thanks a lot again to all.